So before we get started, does anybody have any questions? What questions do you have, I guess, about what we're doing in this breakout room?
I would really appreciate if you could repeat what's the main goal of the survey. What do you expect as an outcomes? How you will use it.
Mm-hmm.
It's making it a bit easier than to evaluate the question.
Yes, great question. So the point of this survey is we are going to send it out to researchers, data support positions, and our goal is to get information about the different kinds of needs that these people have when it comes to writing data management plans within a discipline. Because there's a lot of guidance out there for general data management plans, but we're trying to figure out where the gaps are when it comes to having that disciplinary support. So whether people are saying like, okay, we need a lot more information about data types maybe, or the active storage, which is the section that we're going to be working on, is really lacking in this discipline or in this field or in this type of situation. So the survey questions are based off of the Science Europe kind of core requirements for a data management plan because we didn't want to just make up our own off the top of our heads. So, these are areas that have already kind of been recognized as important within a data management plan. And so our goal is to figure out where within the disciplines there's gaps where people need additional guidance. And so in this particular breakout group, what we are going to be doing, and I say we, I'm really here as a moderator because I am much more interested in your guys' opinions on these than adding mine. But basically, we are hoping that during this breakout session, we will go through the survey, and it's okay if we do not get through all of it. That's why every group is starting at a different section. But going through and commenting, editing, seeing what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, because you guys have never seen this survey before. So, we've been looking at it for a while now. And so you can do that in a variety of ways. If you want to write like freehand comments, if you want to, it's not track changes in Google. What is it? Suggesting. If you want to turn on the suggesting function so that you can like type without deleting things, that's totally fine. It's really kind of, if we want to look at it as a group or if people want to go in individually, whatever makes people most comfortable, if you want to do a combination of the two. We are starting down at the active data storage and backup, which is on the 5th page. So we would start at question number 16. And I will be here to answer your guys' questions as we go along. If you have anything that comes up, you will not offend me if you do not like parts of the survey, so do not worry about that. So I think that's kind of my spiel and my intro, and we'll be here at this point for another 40 minutes or so. So, as much as we get through, we have like the very last section. So if you're reading through and you're like, okay, I want to start looking at other parts, what we're going to do with these collaborative notes from the different breakout groups is then take them and look at them all together to kind of create our final draft of the survey. Okay. So any other questions?
So do we want to go question by question, or otherwise the best, or others have other ideas?
Yeah, it's hard to tell because one of the downsides of this platform is I can't actually tell how many people are in our breakout room because I can only count if people have their video on. So if I don't know if there's too many of us to be doing like a whole group discussion on one, but we could certainly try. And if that doesn't work, or if people are just like, this isn't working for me and want to go off and like read their own, because we also know that a lot of you support different disciplines, and so people might have different ideas depending on what their role is, what their disciplinary expertise is, and that's great too. So
I think that we are around 10 to 15 should be okay.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, as long as there's not like a massive group hiding without their camera on, which I don't think there probably is. So
I think you can look at the list of participants, and it's 13. If you click on the little kind of human, the symbol at there's like something that looks like a person sort of thing. If you
you're
click
right.
on the list of participants.
You're right. Normally, I think that shows.
It doesn't sum it up.
Yeah,
It's
I
just
think,
listed.
yeah, okay. That's actually helpful. So yeah, so we can certainly go through them all together if people want. So, okay, so let's get started, I guess, here at question number 16. And there is no right kind of feedback. Like if it's something grammatical, that's just as valid as something that like the substance of this question or these answers don't make sense. So.
Can I ask a question then to start with?
Of course.
This is about backing up, and it asks for the type of data that you want to back up.
Mm-hmm.
But this is not a very exhaustive list of data types. So is it something also related to another question? Is there somewhere a question like what kind of data types or data do you collect?
Yes, there's a section on data description and collection. So I'll just read out the general areas so we don't have to go back through. So there's a section on data description and collection, data documentation and quality, and then active data storage is the third one. And then we also have one on data archiving, publishing, and sharing, guidelines, principles, and best practices. And then there's some open-ended stuff at the bottom. This particular section that we're starting on is quite small. It was literally just a way to have the different groups start at different sections, so not everybody was going from question 1 down.
So the logic behind this question is that there is data which is not going to be backed up. So research data with no need of backup, is there? I haven't seen ever. So, so is this a track question that all the answers are wrong ones, or should we just pick those like surveys? You need to back up your survey, all answers, of course, you can't lose them.
Mm-hmm.
So should we just put there something that we really think that are not necessary to back up?
I don't have an answer to that in terms of, I think Jonathan, are you raising your hand?
I am. I'm not sure how I would do this. So I'm going to have to figure out how to do this in the thing. For a second. So following Mary Elisa's question or idea here, I mean, when I talk to researchers about backing up their data, the first thing I would say is, if you can back up everything, if you only have like a megabyte of data, you should back it all up. And unless there's now there might be some compelling reasons why not. You know, if it's really sensitive data, you don't want to have 10 copies everywhere because you don't want to have a breach of confidentiality or something. But as a general rule, you should back up everything. But there are cases like where I might generate 10 terabytes of data, and backing it up 3 or 4 or 5 times is really hard. So a question I tend to ask people is, what's the critical data? What's the critical stuff? Like if you lose, you might have 7 products you generate, but if you lose this one product, like you lose this one product, you could reproduce it. It would be annoying, you would be mad, but that's okay. You lose this product and your research is done. Like you're gonna quit. You're gonna go start flipping burgers or something. And so understanding what's what is an important question. And this gets to it, but I think that you could ask more.
Can you think of a better way to phrase it? And it's okay if you can't. I don't want to put you on the spot, because I know coming up with full survey questions on the spot.
I guess what I would wonder is like what's being generated in the research, and that's probably further up. What data types are being generated, and which ones are critical? How critical is this to the research? So an example here would be for my own research when I was doing it, doing computational modeling work. Reproducing the model output is doable. The code, I took years to debug and smash together, and that was a terrible, painful process. If I lost that code, I was done. I'm going somewhere else. but reproducing the model output, I can do it. So that's example balance between what's critical and what's not.
I am listening. I'm typing notes as we go along in here so that you guys can do the thinking.
No, that was more or less also what I wanted to say. Like, it may be like if your data is the output of a huge calculation, it just takes maybe a couple of weeks to rerun the program, whatever, but you can reproduce it. It's a nuisance, but you can reproduce it. And then, okay, if it's a huge amount of data and you don't have the space, maybe you don't want to back up. Basically that sort of thing. Whereas if it's whatever, some climate data that has been collected over the last 100 years, you won't be able to reproduce it. It's much more valuable in that sense.
So maybe here the issue is the phrase most important doesn't quite get at the heart of it, but maybe we want to more focus on what is critical and unreproducible. That's a terrible word. I will think of a better one at some point. But so the idea of this question is okay. It's just the framing of it right here is not particularly helpful or clear.
Yeah, but also it's the idea is exactly like this critical, reproducible. How much of an effort is it to reconstruct it, whatever, and then audiovisual is more a data type. I mean, there may be types. You may have audiovisual data that is completely unreproducible, and then there may be audiovisual data that is reproducible and it's easily done. So somehow the two concepts don't go together very well in the question.
Well, the first thing that we want to know is what do we want to learn from this question? What do we, in what sense will it help to differentiate between disciplines? I don't think it's differentiating between disciplines, but differentiating for data types. I think these data types, that from two disciplines, as far as I can see, more the physics and the science, and maybe social sciences. But I think, a lot of data types are missing. That's why I was asking this question. So are people asked to reflect on data types in an earlier stage? And then, but what would we learn? We want to learn what we want to give them guidance on how to back up. Is that the idea behind it? If they're filling out the data management plan, what should we tell them about backing up? Well,
I will say, oh, sorry, go ahead, Simon.
I was just going to add, I agree really with the earlier points. I think it's not so important the medium of the data. It's more important what it is, what it represents within the project. So to me, it's like, are people backing up their code? Are they backing up materials they use to generate data, like questionnaires? Is it the data itself? Is it the outputs of the data? It's not really whether those outputs are audio-visual or algorithms. It's purely about the role that they play within the life of the project.
Okay. Yeah, that's actually really great because it does kind of help focus and it is asking a different question.
I was thinking that the big question here is that if you have a process where you prioritize these, or does it happen only by accident? So that you don't have money and you didn't budget money for backups. So, but I don't know how these kind of questions could fit to this questionnaire. Do you have a process? Have you think about how you will decide which part of data is so valuable that you should back up it, and which is not like doable, which is too expensive.
So that sort of correlates, and that might be an interesting point to put on here for question 17, because that is, the question is, do you back up your research data? And if you do, how often are you relying on that backed up data to recover? So maybe another question or a sub-question might be, do you have a process? If we say yes, if a respondent says yes, we could ask, like, what is their process? Let me add a note.
For me, it would be also, I don't know if this is kind of disciplinary specific, it might be, but it is kind of a question of where, what kind of tools they use and services they use for the backup? Is it kind of, in the university, something that is offered by a certain discipline? That would be kind of interesting to know. Actually, more relates back to the size of the data itself, because I'm coming from social sciences, and the data are relatively small, so you could back up it on several disks and somewhere. But when you're talking about large capacities, you need support, and I think this is what would be good to know in this respect.
Mm-hmm. I will say, I think all of you have touched on this either directly or indirectly, but there is definitely a difference / contrast between discipline and data type. And I think another kind of side benefit that we're hoping to get from this survey is to also have people talk more specifically about data type and see what is common within disciplines, and if it makes more sense to create the final guidance as, also or more prominently talking about data type guidance as opposed to just disciplinary specific guidance, because that is something that we've definitely heard feedback on. I mean, you guys, the first 10 minutes hit it on the nose, that a lot of it really does depend on data type and data size as opposed to just what discipline, because, depending on your discipline, you can be working with wildly different data types. And so yeah, that is definitely we are aware of that. And I think we're trying to, if you can think of good ways to address that in the survey too, as we go through, feel free to add that in or say that out, and I can add it to the notes.
I mean, in terms of data type, do you mean in terms what are the file formats and things like that, or is it, because I think that would be, to be honest, opening up a can of worms. I think it would be so broad, so many answers, that it would be meaningless. I think what we perhaps want to get to the heart of are people using recognized standards within their discipline as for their files. So is there specific discipline guidance that states, that you should be producing files in a particular format? Are the formats proprietary or open source? So that you've got a better idea about what their long-term stability might be. And it's those sorts of questions which are more important than the particular file formats, because you'll just get hundreds, if not thousands, of different answers. And then, what do you do with that? It's just a list of different file formats.
Yeah, so we do have a section on here for guidelines, principles, and best practices that kind of gets more to the heart of that. And we might actually get to that. So maybe we'll put a pin in that. And if we get to that section, we can talk about it then. But that is definitely an area that we are hoping to address. Okay.
So one thing I'm trying to bring in the concept of discipline-specific guidance to this. So we're talking about some more general stuff, I'd say, as a whole. Different research disciplines and the communities within them have ways they talk about their research. Meteorology, where I came from, has a way of talking about research. Social scientists and certain people who do surveys have ways of talking about the research. I mean, this is one of the problems we have when you first start talking about researchers about their data. Like, well, what are you talking about? What is my data? I don't even know what you're referring to. I present my stuff with publications and presentations. That's what you're talking about, right? No. So there are, I don't know that every discipline's done this, but in some disciplines there have been efforts to put together guidance on, well, here's how we think our data should be managed. And that includes backing up and storing. So I put an example in the link that I was a participant in around guidance for geospatial modeling data. Geoscience modeling data, not geospatial, sorry. Like how should we address data that comes from computer outputs, modeling outputs, or from code? And that's just one example. And I think that having links to this kind of information would be useful. I don't know, it's a big lift to ask for cataloging all this kind of guidance across disciplines, how many disciplines, how many initiatives. But so when you talk to a researcher from a certain discipline, and they're like, well, I don't know, what are you talking about managing my data? Talking in their jargon, talking about it, how they talk about it, and giving them guidance around how their community thinks about these things would be fantastic. And some of the guidance is going to be general, and not discipline specific, but some of it is.
That's a great point. And thank you for dropping in that link. Is helpful.
I was thinking about this hard active data storage and backup, and I often hear that from IT experts that storage and backup is not discipline specific because data doesn't ask when it's storing system doesn't ask about the content, it doesn't understand it. So I think that's why we don't get anything discipline specific here. But I was thinking about the versioning which is part of backup, because I don't think we are talking about overwriting information over old one, but the nice backup systems are so that you can actually track back the versioning also, and some disciplines have nice softwares for these tools for versioning, and could we ask about these? Do you have so that I don't think we could improve the question of data management plans, but maybe we could improve the guidance of data management plans if we knew tools for this versioning and how to keep track of the state of the is this data packaged or not? Where are all the versions and so on? Which was the latest one and so on. So this is about the storing, but it's more like platform or some more like nicer tools for storing your files.
I would slightly disagree, Mary, there about the data doesn't say which discipline it's from, and by countering and saying, but data protection law may say there is a difference if you're working with, for example, the meteorological data. I work with human genome data, so there are certain things which actually have to be in place that may not be that may be discipline specific in terms of who may access those backups and the security that's around those. So and generally, a data point is a data point. It looks the same, but I think as well there will be special requirements if you're working with personally identifiable data and non-personally identifiable data. So that may be discipline specific.
Great. Okay. I see a hand up. Go ahead. Jinti, I'm sorry, I might be mispronouncing your name. Oh, I think you're muted.
I'm sorry, I'm not anymore.
Nope, you're good.
So what catches my eye is that there is a similar kind of question in the next section. I think it's number 18, no, number 19. Number 19, it's about long-term preservation. It's of course not completely the same as active storage, but it's also kind of preservation, and the answers the respondents have to choose from are cardinally different from what is given in question 16. So it's completely different categories that are called on. And I don't see how those two questions could make sense. Because in the first question, they ask you about audiovisual and also this sort of thing. And in the next similar kind of question, it's already processed raw. It's one level up. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, it's just a suggestion from my part that maybe this question 16 could swap places with question 17. And I understand that you were trying to be helpful by making it a closed question, but is it possible to, if you go into such small categories, to make it a closed question? Because you will be never able to list all types of data that are available there. And there will be there will always be this one researcher who will say, oh, they don't mention my data. It's not about me.
That is an excellent point. Thank you. I made that as a note. And that's actually a good segue. I think if we want to kind of start also now looking at the data archiving, publishing, and sharing questions section. So 18 through 20, because I think that kind of touches on some of the stuff we've been talking about with the active storage. So go ahead and take a minute to read those over, and feel free to either chat out loud or add things in the document.
So one of the elements, and I don't know whether it's relevant, but in the 18, when you have answer categories, they're a bit different. You have storage solution, you have long-term preservation, and then you have it again storage solution. Do you want to align kind of these answers, or is it relevant that it's a different?
I don't know, and not in a bad way, but I think that's a good point. We like consistency in wording in surveys.
Yeah, but the first three actually goes, do you have storage, do you have long-term preservation, and do you have data publishing? And is this, aren't we as a kind of a researcher looking for like one solution to take it all?
Mm-hmm.
Is it common that this would be separate?
Yeah, and it might be one of those, depending on the research or the discipline, but I think you make a very good point that using 3 different words to talk about it, I think it's another one of those jargon situations where depending on what you're doing or what you call it is what you maybe react as. But I think maybe that can be written a bit more clearly.
Yeah, but it's actually, it seems that there are 3 different things, because it's yes for the storage, it's yes for the preservation, and then it's yes for publishing.
I think certainly the long-term preservation and the data publishing are 2 very different things. I mean, all your raw data, you probably don't want to publish. I mean, it depends what it is, but in many cases you don't want to publish it, but you publish maybe a subset of it, or even a processed subset of it. I mean, again, depends on the context, but I think it's 2 separate things.
But then in the no section, we're only talking about storage and not about preservation and publishing.
Yeah, perhaps in that first answer, I think when we said disciplinary storage solution, I think we were leaning more towards repository in terms of like the idea. So, with genomic data, there's some standard repositories that people can use to publish their data. But I think you're right, storage and repositories, this almost might be better, and you guys can correct me if I'm misinterpreting what you're saying, but it almost might be better to ask about like long-term storage and publishing in 2 separate questions, because they are 2 different ideas. Okay.
Yeah, Shannon, is there an intention maybe to add some guidance language to the questions? Was that an intention, or was it not?
Not at the moment, just because it wasn't like, but it was not like discussed and saying, no, we are not going to add guidance questions. So do you think that is something that might be helpful?
Well, I do wonder. I mean, I'm not sure that I wonder if we, even as a group of people who are providing support for this, could agree on what a repository is. And I'm more likely to believe that there are many researchers who did not know what a repository is, or what the differences are between storage and preservation. And I don't know that we agree on what the differences between storage and preservation are. So I think it might be something that would be useful, is like, when we talk about a repository, it might be something you might find in RE3 data, which is linked here. Something like that, some sort of guidance like that might be useful. to help out as to what we're talking about here.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, that's what DMP Tool does. They've got their little sidebar.
Maybe also it has been said, but if I want to answer the question and I don't have a disciplinary repository, but a general repository that I use that's maybe recommended by my institution, what would I answer them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. Because like I'm looking and like I would think, you would answer the second one, but it might not. That might not be what you think of. So being like, here's a good spot to.
Mm-hmm.
And I will add that as a. So how do we think question 20 compares to question 18? Does it seem different enough? Does it seem not clear?
Again, general, we have in the Netherlands general, or Zenodo, for instance, is a general platform for many disciplines, which people can use to share their data. And it's not a disciplinary platform.
Point, added that.
You could also be in the situation where you're not using either of the first three, but you still share your data with selected colleagues by email or something.
Mm-hmm. Publishers as supplementary materials, which we don't recommend, but still, we don't recommend them to use Dropbox maybe either. So.
And regarding the connection between question 18 and 20, I think it is a bit confusing when you see storage, preservation, publishing in question 18, and then sharing again in question 20. So maybe question 18 could be limited to storage, and then everything that has the word publishing, sharing in it could go into question 20.
Great. Any other comments or thoughts on the data archiving, publishing, and sharing? We've got about 8 minutes before we have to go back to the main room. So if people want to chat about these two sections, or if you're like, nah, let's try and, start on the next, either is fine with me.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to go off on a tangent, but I'm thinking of the kind of data that you share and the way that other people can run code on it, whatever, but you're not actually making the data visible. I don't know what the term for that is. There is a term for it, but like when it's very sensitive data. So basically, I mean, people can run queries on it, but you're not actually sharing the data as such. So what would you respond in that case?
Do you mean a like remote execution model?
Yeah, probably that's the word. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think question 20 is following that, Mark, is more how do you publicly share your data? Is more what the question seems like it's getting at. But there are many other ways to share data. You could share data individually as a person via email, or share sensitive data via a data use agreement. So, but it doesn't seem like that's the kind of sharing we're talking about here.
That is a good interpretation, I think, of what that question, yeah, that publicly aspect.
I just remember asking a similar question in a survey at our university, and like 80% of the researchers would answer, we don't share our data at all.
Yeah, that could be very real. I would not be surprised if the same thing happened here.
Let's call it data mining. My data is mine, and your data is mine.
Another thing, if anybody has any, if you've been looking at the whole survey, if there's any sections that you think, or I guess any topics that you think were missing from the survey that at this level might be good to include, that is also, I am more than happy to make notes on that if you want to take a minute to scroll and just kind of glance at the rest of the survey.
I was thinking about the next questions. Can the person answering the questionnaire add a link to the guidelines and so on, so that?
Oh, that's a great idea.
It is easy to find the guideline the person is referring if there is an option to provide a link.
For question 20, sorry to return there, would it be possible for, if people say, I don't share my data, for them to give a reason? Because I'd be curious to see whether it's a lack of options in terms of like facilities to do so, whether it's a cost issue, whether it's, as Jonathan said, they just don't like sharing because it's theirs.
Idea. I like it. Does anybody have any other thoughts on the guidelines, principles, and best practices? We've only got 4 minutes left, but I have a feeling that the other groups probably also did not get super far.
Just one more in the style of asking the questions is the first 3 are, are you aware? And then there's a question, how familiar are researchers in your discipline? But if you address the question to the researcher, then of course you would want to know if he or she is aware. And then maybe next question could be, do you think that your peers are familiar with this, with these standards? Like this is more, I think, addressing to disciplinary data supporters. And indeed, also here it's nice to know if you want to develop guidance, which standards are being used. And, but I think there's already space to add a link to a terminology or a metadata standard, I think.
Shannon, can I just ask if, more general question, are you kind of linked with the group that is working on different disciplinary recommendations from the research?
Not at the moment. We're kind of,
Europe?
yeah, I know, and that was one of the, I actually pulled up we just got the tab feedback this morning, and that was one of their questions, was like how we are going to be working with those other groups. And our goal definitely is to, because, you know, they have a much better pulse on what some of these disciplines are doing and the recommendations that they are giving. I think we just haven't gotten to that point yet. But, you know, we know that those groups exist, and we definitely want to work with them in a way that is mutually beneficial for both groups, so that we can both kind of get something out of this. So if you have any recommendations or ideas for, I don't know if maybe you are part of some of those groups, feel free to, you know.
Yeah, I don't know if it kind of makes sense at all. I'll put in a chat something that was worked on about 2 years ago. So these are kind of domain data protocols for the social sciences. So it's kind of, the idea is that the researcher will not have a full text, but they could already click on. And I saw something like that also for archaeology and some other disciplines. So you might want to go back to these groups and see if you could use this kind of document.
It looks like that is locked. I think you have to request access, but
yeah, you might want. Yeah, I'm not.
Okay.
Sorry for that.
And actually, with that, if anybody has any last comments, we are actually at our time. So feel free to head back to the main room. If you scroll down, you can see there's a link that says back to the working group discipline-specific guidance. And that should take you back to the main room. Thank you so much for all of your help. And there's my timer. And if you want to keep adding stuff to this document later, to other sections, if you're someone who really loves going over surveys, feel free. These, we'll leave them open. We won't be working on them in like the next week or so. So, you know, feel free if you're bored later. But thank you again. See you guys back in the main room.